Hello, Booktube. All right, we're at 7.6K Q&A, and we are on part 3. Our first question goes to Marcus. Could you give us any insights to how you communicate with dogs? Afraid not. No, no. Although, when it comes to human-dog communication, I do dog-dog communication. But when it comes to human-dog communication, I can give you lots of tips, lots and lots of tips, because I've often made a good side income in any given year, coaching people on how to get along with their dogs. There are some very basic rules that a lot of dog owners just don't follow. And so the burden falls on the dog to do all the work, and that's not fair. Consistency of the sounds, consistency of your commands is crucial. Never showing any anger to the dog. Crucial. Absolutely crucial. Dogs want to please you. They want your approval. Your anger will produce a whole suite of automatic responses in them that are counterintuitive. They're counteractive to whatever you want. Believe me, they are. You'll get a cowed dog who might refuse to do anything, so they stop doing the thing you don't like. But you won't get a dog that's working with you to do what you want. So never any anger and consistency in responses. I once had a client whose dog simply would not listen to her at all when the dog was doing something that she didn't want, and she told it to stop. The dog would just ignore her. And I said, oh, well, that's too bad. We can certainly fix that. And I came over. This was back when we could visit people. And I said, I'm just going to stand here. I want, when the dog starts to do something you don't like, then tell the dog to stop, and then we'll go from there. We'll see what's going on. And the dog started gnawing on a leg of furniture, and the woman said, no exaggeration, the woman said, Sandy, stop. No, quit it. Cut it out. Stop it. So later, I had to point out to her, your dog has no idea what you're saying. You use 10 different synonyms. A human would have trouble with what you're saying. So consistency. But in terms of what I do, no, I don't have any tips. Let's see here. Sotiris Itzos says, thoughts on Greg Egan's hard science fiction novels, and also what are some really hard science fiction novels? Well, I don't think I've ever read Greg Egan. And I don't know what would constitute real hard science fiction. I read Larry Niven back a long time ago, the same as everybody else. I think he once counted as hard science fiction. I didn't enjoy him at all. There's been hard science fiction, at least what I consider so, that I've enjoyed, like David Brin or Werner Vinge. But it's not typically my favorite thing because it seems to rest a lot of weight on non-dramatic elements, on you dropping, a double neutrino quasar and not really explaining or talking down to your reader when you do explain it. So it's not my favorite kind of science fiction. Let's see here. Ray Cherchet says, have you ever studied to become a Jesuit priest? No. No, I have not. I very much enjoyed my time with the Jesuits, but I lack essential element to study to be a Jesuit priest, which is faith. I don't believe in gods. And was it ever under consideration? No, not by me. Andrew Russell says, hey Steve, is there a straightforward way to tell whether you have simply misunderstood a book due to your limited reading experience, or whether the book is simply not worth trying to understand? For example, Joyce. There are ways, and they are sliding variables. If you are very young and have done very little reading, no condescension here meant at all, but if you are very young and have done very little reading, you should not partake of the 21st century attitude that the younger you are, the smarter you are, the more omniscient you are. I know 22-year-olds who in the year 2020 believe they know literally everything, about literally everything. It's not true. They don't know who the combatants were in World War II. These same kids will just pompously say, yeah, it's just the way it is. Look, I'm too tired to explain it to you. And you'll say, okay, can you name me an ally of the U.S. during World War II? What? So first sliding variable you should figure out is it likely that it's your lack of experience? Okay, so if you're very young, if you're not read widely as a reader, and you feel that something in a book is just not working, and you suspect that it's because it's going over your head, it very well may be. If you're a far more experienced reader, and you're reading something and not getting it, you are more justified to look at it and say, well, okay, I brought all my tools to the table and this isn't working, so is it possible that the author is doing something wrong? Like, for instance, I think without egotism, I could call myself an experienced reader. And if I am reading a novel or even a work of nonfiction, a work of history, and I encounter a chapter or a passage and I'm saying, what on earth is this doing here? Why on earth is this here? I do not understand this at all. My first assumption is that is because the author is doing something wrong, because I have been around the block a couple of times, and I would, if they were doing something unusual but doing it right, I would notice. That sometimes isn't true, but the number one sliding yardstick here is how much experience do you have. Let's see here. Jeremy Watson asks, Alan Moore's Jerusalem made your worst books of 2016 list for fiction. Here we go. Perfect example. Perfect example. A perfectly timed question from the last one. Yes, because I initially thought that Alan Moore's gigantic book, Jerusalem, was a huge feat of just complete navel-gazing on his part. It was only a reread that showed me there was a lot more going on. But earlier this year, you tweeted that after the second read, you were deeply impressed. What about the book impressed you? There are two narratives going on. There are two things happening in Jerusalem, and I was only paying attention to the surface one. There's an entirely well-articulated second thing going on in that book, and it is masterfully done. And I should, in retrospect, have anticipated that, because, of course, famously, that is the narrative structure of The Watchmen, which will forever be the most famous thing that Michael Moorcock writes. And in The Watchmen, there are two stories going on, one story within another story. And I should have known. I should have anticipated that, but I didn't. And that second thing that's going on in the book, the fantasy element, the fantasy story, to use a very simplistic term for it, is masterfully done. So I needed time to see that. I tried it once, but I had to put it down. It was a chore. Well, yes, there are two separate strands going on in the novel, and I think you probably have to get to around page 200 or 250 to get a sense of the movement of both of them. In the first 100 pages, you're only going to see the first one, and the first one seems like a stillborn memoir. It seems like an uphill chore. I felt the same way. So if it's nagging at you and you're sitting on the shelves accusing you, you might try it again. I don't ordinarily advise this. I ordinarily say that if something is uphill work, then it might not be the right time for you to read it. Put it aside and come back to it some other time. This might be an exception to that. It might be worth your time to plow right through. Thomas R.P. says, I recently read Trainspotting by Irvine Welsh and loved it. What are your thoughts on Welsh, and are his other works worth getting into? I had the same experience with Welsh. I read Trainspotting when it was the talk of the town, when it was everybody's thing. And I didn't see a whole lot. I saw his intelligence, I think, is on every page. But I didn't see a whole lot more than that. I had to go back to it a few years later to find out that it had a lot of heart. That was one thing I thought was missing in my first reading, is heart. But it actually does have a lot of that. And I've since read a lot of Irvine Welsh. I think it works well. There's a lot of it that works well. He's actually a very interesting author. Benjamin Revel says, you seem to value Pynchon's fiction, but not David Foster Wallace's. True. What's the big difference in your opinion? Pynchon's is controlled, and David Foster Wallace's is ostentatiously not. Pynchon was the exact opposite of an egotistical author, and David Foster Wallace was one of the most egotistical authors ever to put pen to paper. And that is the yardstick between them. Pynchon didn't think that anything that he wrote was worth people to read, which is why he brutally rewrote it over and over and over again, worked torturing on every line. Whereas David Foster Wallace thought that literally anything that he could type or write at all on any subject in any way was not only worth people to read, but worth people to study. That shows in the end writing. Not to mention how odious an idea it is personally, but it shows in the end writing. James Holder says, is there any chance of doing a deeper dive into the TLS or the New York Review of Books? Well, James, should I do that? I never know if I should do that. I always feel like when I go through one of those things, I'm boring people. I don't know. I'll try it. If you want, I'll try it. I certainly go through them with a fine-tooth comb all the way to the personal ads. But I sometimes feel like I will do the highlights, funny letters, a provocative column here and there. But I don't go through the pieces. Maybe I should. After all, there are probably quite a few of you who don't take either one of those journals, but are still interested in their contents. Okay, I'll try it with the next one. I don't know which one I'll get. The next one I get, the TLS or the New York Review of Books, I'll do a deep dive. I'll go straight through it. We'll see if people like it. James also asked, have you settled on a project for NaNoWriMo? No, I have not. No, I am not. I'm trying not to court disaster this time. The last few times that I've tried Nanowrimo, I've settled on a project in September, done a whole bunch of research, outlined to it fairly well, and literally the night before, changed my mind. So I'm not going to put so much weight on it. I will settle on a project in Preptober. Those of you who don't know what we're talking about, NaNoWriMo is National Novel Writing Month. It happens in November. And the writing community, especially on AuthorTube, sets aside October as Preptober for prepping for NaNoWriMo. I plan on being very active in Preptober, lots of videos. So I'll probably settle on a project then. I might even ask around. I might even ask everybody, all the rest of you. Because I think with NaNoWriMo this year, I know I said this last year and I didn't do it, but I think with NaNoWriMo this year, I would like to publish it. I'd like to finish it and publish it. So maybe it makes sense that you would have an access to it. And then James's final question, how goes the Red Bishop? Oh my. Paperback Junkie used to be a Booktube channel named Paperback Junkie, and he ran a zine, a good old-fashioned fantasy zine, full of reprinted previously published material and also new material. And I was doing an adventure sequel, a serial for Weird Mask was the name of the zine. And my adventure serial was called The Red Bishop, and I didn't finish it. Famously, I didn't finish it. So I know the ending. I know everything that happens step by step, chapter by chapter. The Red Bishop is stopped. Not finished, not over, but stopped. John Petter says, do you think you are the most random booktuber around? Depends on what you mean by random. I don't really know. My reading tastes are not predictable. And that is not for show, as anyone who's ever met me in real life, or, well, it wouldn't matter anyway if you met me in real life. No one, myself included, could maintain a facade for 4 solid years on 4,000 videos. What are some advantages to being a polyglot? Well, I never get bored, and I never have as pronounced a feeling of FOMO, a fear of missing out. How do you judge if a long book has earned its length? If it bores me. The popular conception that a really, really long book, 1,000-pager or something like that, will have somehow earned the right to have longueurs is totally mistaken. It has to. If it bores me, then it shouldn't be that long. Let's see here. Logan Mortensen says, thoughts on Rick Perlstein's History of American Conservative series. It's not very good. He's a pretty slipshod historian. Particularly his most recent book, Reaganland, which I just started diving into. Well, if you're reading it, then you'll know what I'm talking about. He is very engaging on the page. But do what I did with his last couple of books. Do what I did. Do a micro dive. It's like tapping the walls, for plaster versus a support beam. When you're reading Reaganland, then the next time you get to a scene or an imbroglio or a particular dramatic point where something is happening in the storyline, do a deep dive, do a micro dive into exactly what his sources are. In most of his books, I do that at random, and in most of his books, every time I've done that, I've found that he is seriously misrepresenting what his sources actually say in order to bolster his own narrative. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. Especially when it comes to a subject like the one he's writing about, where I know the subject really well, where I don't need to do a micro dive to know when he's just pulling stuff out of his tuchus. But try it yourself. If he says that such and such a thing happened at such and such a speech on such and such a day, go into his index and chase down his sources. You will almost certainly find that he is fudging the details. So I can't recommend them. I wish I could, because it's great subject matter. Tom Allison says, a longtime viewer. Well, hello. Thank you. Curious if you have a good beginner but comprehensive Roman Empire book recommendation. Cheers from that former convict island you have yet to visit, Australia. Well, this is going to be tough because the Roman Empire is a sprawling subject. It's centuries of time and tons of people and pivotal events. So something like Simon Baker wrote a 1-volume history of the Roman Empire that is very potted. It's very easy, but I don't advise it. There's no reason for it. You're not going to be interested in the Roman Empire, right? Let's put it simply. You're not going to be interested in the Roman Empire. You're going to be interested in a certain part of the Roman Empire, a certain person, a certain thread or location or law or a certain legion or military or whatever. There's going to be some part of that 800-year-old subject, that 800 span, that you are actually interested in. And that's where you're going to do your reading, and you'll branch out from there. That's the right way to do it. So I would suggest skip an overall book. Why would you need that anyway? Just read on Wikipedia, read on Encyclopedia Britannica. Use the advantages of the internet at your fingertips to read up on the general history of the Roman Empire. And from that reading, your instincts will pick out the parts you want to concentrate on. And once you do that, once you have parts to concentrate on, well, then there are endless numbers of books I can recommend. What if, I mean, the Roman Empire, you could argue that it predates Julius Caesar. And you could say that it goes all the way to the fall of Constantinople. That's an enormous length of time. What happens if when you're reading the overviews of that, you realize it's the Emperor Domitian that you're interested in? Out of all that, well, there's plenty to read about the Emperor Domitian. And you can burrow down to the details and then work outward from there. That's the better way to do it than finding a general history that somebody knocked together from their own Encyclopedia Britannicas. Wayne Wilkinson, what are your thoughts on Edward Rutherford's historical fiction? It just doesn't do anything for me. It seems so boring. His books are ubiquitous in bookstores. Yes, they are. You can't go to a used bookstore without finding a big waterlogged copy of London or The Forest or something like that. And there's a good reason for that, I think. But I never hear anyone talk about them. Am I missing out by not having read any of them? I don't believe that you are. No. I know that's rough to say because I know he has some fans, but boy, oh boy, I just don't see it. Anthony Suppa says, I was wondering your thoughts on General George B. McClellan. Do you think he was a secret Southern sympathizer or just an inept general? He wasn't actually either one of those. He wasn't a secret Southern sympathizer. He wasn't actually technically an inept general. He wasn't great, but he wasn't bad either. The problem is that he shouldn't have ever been a general. What he was an absolutely beautiful, incredibly effective quartermaster. He should never have held the rank of general. A general has to be willing, as Ulysses S. Grant demonstrated amply in the course of the American Civil War, a general has to be willing to sacrifice his men. Has to be willing to say, there is objective A over there. In order to take, I can take objective A, but the price for taking objective A will be 15,000 dead men who are alive right now. I can hear them singing. The price of taking that objective will be 15,000 dead men. A general has to be willing to say that and do it. And McClellan wasn't. He wasn't willing to do that. So he shouldn't. He had just had the wrong rank. That's all. Also, would you consider resuming your presidential library series? To make it easier for you, left off with James Madison. I should resume the presidential library series, especially after 2020. Especially after 2020, I should. Chris's Reading Corner asks, I hope this finds you well. You have probably been asked this before, but what are the well-rounded translations of the Metamorphoses, the Iliad, and Ovid? As a beginner, I'm looking to read these. Well, the Metamorphoses, I would suggest Horace Gregory. After all this time, 60 years, his translation is still my favorite. And the Iliad, really, my suggestion would be to go to... My old suggestion used to be go to the library, go to the nearest library, pull down all of the translations that they have, sit a while and read, and pick the one you like. Because you're going to have to live with this translation. I'm not sure that you can do that. I don't know where you live. In America, you aren't really able to do that thanks to the pandemic. But if you can do that, that's the way to do it. If not, I'm sure that you can get examples of different translations online. You don't have to read a lot. Like, for instance, Amazon, right? Or Barnes & Noble will give you free samples of a book. If with the Iliad, if that includes part of the Iliad and not just all of the introduction, then you'll be able to get a sense of what each translator is doing. That's the way to do it. Like, for instance, the Richmond Lattimore translation is very literal, so it can be a little sleepy. The Robert Fitzgerald translation is not as literal. It's far more poetic, but it can be a little bit steep because of that, and so on and so forth. Probably the middle ground, if you can't search multiple translations, would be Fagel's. Robert Fagel's translation. Just get the Fagel's translation of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Read the Bernard Knox introductions. Fagel's probably won't let you down as a translator, no matter who you end up liking later on. Orthia NZ says, your channel is awesome. I don't know about that. This is pretty boring stuff. But as long as it's pleasing the rest of you, that's fine by me. 2 questions I've been pondering. How do you deal with beloved stories that turn out to have problematic authors? Is there a way to separate the work and not its writer? Yes, there is a way to do that. Simply do it. Simply do it. Simply don't care whether or not the author had the right Twitter opinions. Simply don't care about that. You're not being asked to date the author. You're not being asked to like the author or spend any time with them at a cabin on the shore. You're judging the work. good luck with that in 2020. In 2020, in the literary world, you are not to mention the quality of the work at all. It's entirely about the author. Look at the Booker long list. The Booker long list was arrived at, aside from Hilary Mantel, the Booker long list was arrived at entirely by researching the biography and the genetics of the candidates, and not the books at all. Not in any way. The Booker Prize judges almost come right out and admit it when they talk about their choices. This is a invigorating new voice. This is a subject matter that no one's ever written about. We don't hear enough from this author's demographic. Nothing to do with the quality of the books. It's all, in the 21st century, it's all about never mind not separating the art from the artist, you're merging the two. And you shouldn't do that. Obviously, you shouldn't do that. Because if you're going to judge a work by the moral superiority of the author, well, then who would escape whipping, right? Nobody's perfect. So I would separate them completely, whether you get mocked by your fellow literary friends or not. You should separate them completely. On another note, I visited my local brick-and-mortar bookstore today and was very disheartened. They were more interested in selling me the scented candles and flavored oils, literally amongst the bookshelves. Yeah. Does there come a point when it's best to abandon local stores and just order books I want online when they are never in stock anyway? Yeah, you have the bookseller associations and bookstore managers going on social media and bewailing the fact that customers aren't coming to their stores. Well, okay, part of that is the pandemic. Part of that is your store anything that a customer would want to go to. You mentioned that books aren't in stock. Very often, that is true. Or the stock is misplaced, or the staff is rude, or the staff is ignorant, or the experience is just off-putting, where the staff wants to sell you add-ons like scented candles or a membership card, rather than care about whether or not you get the book you want, and so on and so forth, right down the line. So my advice would be: do you have a bookstore, a brick-and-mortar bookstore anywhere near you that's convenient that doesn't do any of those things? Might be worth hunting around. If you can find a brick-and-mortar bookstore that is worth supporting, then support them. Absolutely. If they can order books instead of ordering them online, do it. Absolutely do it. But if your local retail bookstores are still working on the pre-COVID model of bored and condescending entitlement, they deserve to die. So just let them go. Just let them go. Ancient Yakunda says, do you think we'll ever live in a world without factory farming? And what do you think it would look like? We won't ever live in that world, but it would look incredible, because a huge amount of the viral climactic damage, the climate damage that's being done in the 21st century is directly a result of factory farming. You get rid of that, you're going to start to heal the system, but it'll never happen. No. Reading with Pugs. Oh, hello. Reading with Pugs says, how did you originally find out about the existence of Booktube? Oh my. I'm sure that it was the algorithm. I'm sure that it was. Because in my case, it wouldn't be like so many undergraduates out there who learned about Booktube because they went online to look about whether or not anybody's ever talked about a book they have to read by tomorrow. I've never had to do anything like that, but probably it was the algorithm. Probably I was watching a literary lecture of some kind on a subject, and the algorithm just lined up a person, an ordinary person, talking in their bedroom to a camera. And I probably watched and thought, what is this? I have no idea what this is. My actual introduction to doing it came from Chris and Giselle Rhodes, but my introduction to Booktube just in general, knowing it's out there, was probably that. CFAX 2 says, now that you've taken your e-reader like a duck to water, have you come across the Delphi Classic series of literary compilations? I think they're incredibly convenient and superb value for the money. I haven't come across them. I'll have to look them up. Luke and Jennifer Higgins ask a barrage of questions. Number one, what are your thoughts on the upcoming Middle-earth series on Amazon? What episode in Middle-earth history would you like to see on the screen, with the caveat that it is a good adaptation? My thoughts are, it looks interesting. We'll see what comes of it. If it's made into a dreary, dragged-on forever melodrama, that might not be good. And if violence is done to the Silmarillion, to the stories in the Silmarillion, this is going to be about the age when the Rings of Power were forged. So this is going to be about the High Elves when they were more powerful than any elves in Lord of the Rings, and it's going to be about Sauron. And that suggests a natural cast of characters. But it also leaves things out. And I don't know that if you own the Amazon property and if you own the Lord of the Rings property and you're doing this, I don't know how you're going to leave some things out. Can't have hobbits in that story. Can't have Ents in that story. Can't have wizards in that story. you can't really have the Nazgul in that story. Are the showrunners for this thing going to be willing to do without those things? I don't think they are. I don't think they are. We'll see. Question number 2. What are your thoughts on Easton Press and Folio Society books? I have some editions I have acquired from thrift stores, but I'm not sure paying $200 or more is worth it for these editions. I might be scared to actually touch, let alone read it. Well, yes, you put your finger right on my thought. I don't care about books as physical objects. So the idea of getting a book that, no matter how beautiful it is, the idea of getting a book that I'm going to be afraid to use, much less batter. I don't just use these books, I batter them. I use them all the time. I pull them down off the shelf. They get a workout, and I make marginalia. And with a folio press or Easton Press, you very much get the impression you're not supposed to do that. Very much you do. They're beautiful objects, and as such, they can make a room. But they do seem off-putting to use. Like, for instance, Mark Richardson at Richardson Reads has an extensive collection of beautiful folio-style society things like that. And he loves them for the aesthetics of them as well as for the subject matter. But if it's the subject matter, like if he were to get like a folio society of the Hornblower Saga, I don't think he would pull those down and read them. I think he would pull down a reading copy instead. And I think that I think most of the pleasure that people get from those editions is non-involved pleasure. They very much pleases them to have them on their shelves, and that's great if that's true. It's not true for me though. So there are no freeloaders in this room, so I wouldn't have one unless I found one. I found one, a couple of them used. If sometimes Folio Society or Easton Press will do a volume that you won't find anywhere else. That they'll do an original volume that you won't find anywhere else, and some of those I want. I would never pay full price for them, though. Never. And Amelia, that's their daughter, is curious to know what your favorite subject was in school. No, you can't count recess or lunch. Well, it depends on what school you mean. When I got to actual subjects in college, it was the liberal arts. It was English and composition. Earlier than that, I didn't have any favorite subjects. I enjoyed, there were parts of school that I enjoyed, there were parts that I didn't like. But it's only when I got to college when you can exercise your own free will as to what you're going to study. That would be the only time that I would count. And totally, what are we doing for time? Okay, we're at 27 minutes, but we only have a few more questions. We could get this done in 3 videos. Great. All right, let's try that then. This could go a little long. Totally Pretentious says, who's your favorite opera composer? Donizetti. Your favorite composer of classical music in general? Tartini. What's the best production of Hamlet you've ever seen? Keanu Reeves, of course. In Canada. And lastly, Brent Cronchi asked a barrage of questions that we'll finish up with. Number 1, will we ever reach James Monroe in the Presidential Library? Yes, we will. I promise we will. Number 2, you describe James Madison as, quote, a man that was his documents, and recommend to read about his time and policies versus the boring man. That being said, what are your thoughts on Irving Brandt's 6-volume biography? It's pretty boring. Number 3, should Harlow Giles Unger be taken seriously with a grain of salt or at all? As an avid reader of history, I've avoided reading the works of, quote, America's most readable historian, due to claims of heavy-handed hagiography and not letting facts get in the way of a good story. However, I'm slightly intrigued in how far Unger will go for his subject. Is there any value to this approach? I don't find any value in this author, no. What he does is basically stemline on a Wikipedia entry. I would go to an author he's written 50 books in the last 10 years. And if in the course of 1 year you write a 200-page biography of John Adams, a 200-page biography of Thomas Paine, a 200-page biography of Tecumseh, then you don't know a lot about any of those figures. Obviously you don't. Or better by far, I think, to just read up in general and free sources online on whatever subject interests you, and then read a historian who's devoted a chunk of time to mastering that subject rather than this guy. He must have a great book deal, but I've never read a book of his that I enjoyed. And lastly, is Ian Fleming considered dude bro lit? I don't think so. You introduced me to this term, and as a nonfiction reader who recently started to dabble in fiction, I've wondered ever since. With dude bro lit, I say you know it by its fruits, and I've never heard a dude bro aficionado praise Ian Fleming. The books on their own, they certainly have a lot of the qualities that constitute dude bro lit. Raving misogyny, a very simple, arrested 8-year-old boy's view of the world, a totally unrealistic estimation of the value or the recompense or the believability of violence, of physical violence, and on down the list. There's a long list of factors that identify dude bro lit, and it's all over the Ian Fleming novels. But I've never got the sense from them that they are accepted by the Dude Bro community, so maybe they're not. But anyway, that appears to be it. That's great. So we're going to wrap this up for now. I want to end, of course, by thanking you all, not only for subscribing in such unbelievable numbers, but also for all of these great questions. A lot of these questions, I could have gone on all day. So I want to thank you very much. We will reconvene at 7.7. Who knows when that will be. But I'm going to wrap this up, and I'll be back. Thank you, Booktube.